Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of 6 Degrees of Associations. I'm your host, Lucas McCann. With me today, Amanda Parsons, Executive Director of the Oregon Recreation and Park Association. Amanda, tell us a little bit about your role as Executive Director at your current association, and then we'll take it back and tell us a little bit about your story, how you found associations.
So I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Recreation and Park Association, which means I answer a lot of emails and phone calls and basically help members connect and convene with each other. We're a statewide association, so we cover the entire state of Oregon. Specifically, our members are parks and recreation professionals, which means they serve in cities, counties, special districts, and state parks in the actual departments or agencies as public servants, often in government. We do have folks in the private sector as well, but largely public sector. We focus on education, advocacy, and networking for parks and recreation. And overall, it's a really fun job because Parks and Rec is fun. So we have fun, we play, we're outside. It's amazing. Oregon is an absolutely beautiful state to get around in and see all of our beautiful park spaces. And so I really can't complain. I've got an amazing membership with an amazing organization.
That's awesome. And Oregon is a beautiful place. As we mentioned before the show, I'm headed there in a few weeks. I'm looking forward to that. It's a good time of year to be there. Lots of hats wearing an association, and we'll come back to that. But tell us a little bit. Let's go back in time. How did you find associations? Where did it all begin?
Probably not too different from many people where it just sort of happened to you. You just kind of tumbled into it because you took a job that was loosely related to what you did. And all of a sudden you're like, what's an association? I actually came into associations from a marketing background, marketing and event planning. And so I had previously worked for my state health department. I had worked in the private sector for a while, had a variety of jobs, ended up finding a position doing programming and events and marketing for the association. And it wasn't until I was really in the job that I even started to pull the thread on what associations were. I had this sort of background, there's an association for everything, right? And then you're like, oh, this one is for this group. Okay, great. And then you get into it and you start connecting with peers and associations and you're like, oh, this is its own thing. This is its own piece here, which is a lot of fun and really helps you, I think, become a better professional. But yeah, I just kind of fell into it through programming, which is I think an excellent way to start in associations because it's so much of what we do.
Absolutely. And there is an association for everything. I recently found an association for cloud observers, and I thought this was something having to do with the internet and storage. It is not. It is literally for those individuals who like observing clouds. But
association for everything. That's hilarious. I love that.
So it came in events and marketing. That's a big aspect of associations. It makes sense, right? We're trying to pull people together and create community and energy. And so in your current role, going back to many, many hats, tell us about some of those hats that you get to wear as executive director. And I say get to because Amanda has enthusiasm for wearing lots of hats, which I think is an important part of being an association.
I do. I don't think I could ever work for a very large company. I did work for the state for a bit, and it just felt too slow, right? And it's nothing against the state health department. I think they're amazing, but I think with a lot of companies that ship's bigger, right? It turns slower. Yeah. One of the things I love about working for a small organization is that you can be nimble and you get to wear multiple hats and you get to see all different sides of it and put it together in your head strategically. I couldn't imagine doing one thing all day, although all I really do is emails and phone calls. But I couldn't imagine. What
about
just doing
different areas? Yeah.
But in different areas, exactly. So I remember during the pandemic, the start of the pandemic, we had to pivot, right? Everybody did. Yeah. We changed. We closed all of our in-person programming. We started moving to Zoom, like everyone else. And my predecessor, boss at the time, before I took on this role, turned to me at one point and he says, all right, I have some good news for you. Good news, bad news. The good news is I'm promoting you. You are now IT director. Okay. And the bad news is there's no pay adjustments to it. And so I'm IT director. And then in this role, I'm also HR manager and I'm also programmer and I help with volunteer management. So there are so many hats that you get to wear and you get to pivot. And sometimes I walk into the office and I think, oh, I've got my task list and I've got like 4 things on it, which means I'm probably going to get through this today. It's never happened.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you get an email saying, hey, have you filled out this such and such form? And you're like, I don't even know what that is.
You just have to learn it on the spot sometimes. Yeah.
You gotta learn it, right? You do building maintenance, you manage staff, you make sure that there's coffee runs, etc. So it's lots and lots of hats. It's always varied. It keeps me interested because I get bored easily and I want to try new things and I want to, do new stuff all the time. And so I absolutely love wearing multiple hats.
So you just painted the picture of small business. That is what happens in small business. And so disclaimer for anybody who's listening, if that doesn't sound like your jam, go find a large corporation.
Yeah. You end up having to, I think, maybe not put out fires per se, but learn on the fly and on the job constantly. And I'm constantly learning new things.
Yeah, especially in your seat. I would say there's probably no 2 days are the same. So your four items could change day to day. And as you said, you get to 2. So tomorrow's has 6 and those will flip flop and turn over. And I too share the sentiment. I like that sort of environment where it's changing, it's dynamic. There's a lot going on. The one thing you have to do is just kind of constantly be reprioritizing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yes, definitely.
So let's talk about some of your favorite hats. We don't have to put you on the spot and tell you all the things that you don't like doing, although that's fun off camera. You can tell us later. But what are some of your favorite hats that you get to wear?
Yeah. I like being able to connect with our members, which I suppose is like a really great thing when you're in a member-based association, to be able to connect with members, and especially volunteer management, which has taken a much bigger role in the last couple of years. Just a little background on that. And I'm sure many people experience the same thing. The pandemic burned folks out, right? And so our volunteer management that started years and years ago had to pivot like everything else during the pandemic. And I think more so for my members, because my members never stopped. My members never got put on hold. They are public servants. They show up when they need to show up. Our public health department said, oh, well, don't worry, just get outside. Well, what does that mean? Where do you go when you get outside? You go to parks, you go to playgrounds, you go to trails, you go hiking, you go where there are trees, where there's greenery, right? Those are all managed by Parks and Rec. And so they never stopped. They never stopped clearing out trash cans and cleaning public toilets and making sure that trails were safe and doing, prescribed fire burns to make sure that we weren't ending up in a disastrous forest fire, because we're Oregon and it's something we always have to deal with. And they didn't stop. And our senior centers got all shut down, right? But it didn't mean that seniors weren't lonely or isolated. And so our senior center staff were finding new and creative ways to do meals in the parking lot or drive-through events, or they never stopped. And so they experienced a lot of burnout in their own jobs, which really trickles down to our association, right? And so our association volunteers also burned out. They wanted to step up. They wanted to participate. They felt a need to come closer together. Our membership actually increased during and after the pandemic, which was fantastic because people saw the value in being able to connect with each other during such a hard time. But they're starting to really feel the weight of everything. And then we quote unquote came back or reopened our community centers and our pools and our parks. And they never got a break. And so this really changed how we managed our volunteers. And our volunteers, that were starting to experience burnout, and we were struggling to find new folks. And then some folks didn't really want to give it up because it was the one thing that they had that brings them a sense of joy, right? When they're so stressed at work, they can at least come to us, which is great. We definitely want to be that space. But it wasn't leaving space for new people. So we really had to take a new perspective on it. And so that is a hat that I've taken on in the last couple of years that I'm really excited about. But is definitely a whole new element, right, to my job. It used to be a nice filter of volunteers, and now there's much more strategy and thought going into our recruitment and our maintenance of volunteers.
Yeah. There is a notion, it's not a good one, that this is this is an endless resource, right? Volunteers. If they churn out, we'll just get some more volunteers. And it's such a lifeblood. I think it's an underserved, we just don't think about this portion of the executive director seat or the association management aspect of volunteer management, right? It's something that needs to be recruited, and it's something that needs to be retained. And maybe the retention piece, I think, is where I heard, before the show, some of the real strategies that you've implemented that I thought were just new, monumental. But talk to us a little bit about recruiting and volunteers. But then I want to switch gears to the retention aspect and some of your strategies you've implemented there.
Yeah. The recruitment has changed in the sense that we are actually taking that away from staff more. And it used to be, because we know everybody, right? Like, I've got several thousand members and I know probably 75% of their names and faces, right? Because that's my job. And so sometimes somebody will say, who do we know that does this? And I'll be like, oh, this person does this, or this person, right? But me calling someone up and saying, I think you should be part of this committee. I mean, that's great. That sounds like work.
Yeah.
That sounds like that sounds like.
Thanks for thinking of me, but that sounds like another job. Yeah.
Right. It sounds like another job. It sounds like, oh, great. Now the association needs people, right? Which isn't a really, you don't want to, and we're doing fine, but you don't want to come off like you're desperate for people, right? I think folks really want to feel like they're part of an organization that is successful, that's floating, that's moving along really well. And so one of the things we did was we stopped recruiting from staff, or not entirely, but for the most part. And instead, we took that same effort and we passed it along to our existing volunteers for two things. One, to help them start recruiting for each other. And two, to make sure they're always recruiting for their own replacement, right? So they have that. And so we've been writing letters that our volunteers and our volunteers in leadership positions can send out to other folks that they think might be great. We've been asking them to reach out to folks outside their agency so they can help build their own peer network. And one of the things that this has really helped with is if you're a member of an association, you want to hear from your peer more than you really want to hear from your association, right? Like, you may appreciate your association. Hopefully they absolutely adore us and want to keep paying their member dues and participate in all the programs that we have, and they're really excited about it. But the whole point is to connect with other members, right? I don't work in Parks and Recreation. I work in association management. So my challenges are going to be very different from my members, and who they want to connect with are each other. And so when I hear from a peer, you should do this thing, or I've really enjoyed this thing and I think you might as well, that is so much more powerful than if they heard it from me. That is going to resonate so much more. And so we have volunteers coming in saying, Joe told me to do this, or Amanda told me to do this, or Ken told me to, whoever. And that is an endorsement of the organization and a reason for them to come and volunteer with us. And that's been really big, is really having our volunteers find more volunteers. And the other thing we've been doing is we've been kicking out our volunteers, which sounds really terrible.
I think it's brilliant, but yeah.
You don't really want to get rid of your volunteers, because the life cycle for, I think, a lot of associations is you find somebody who does really great work, right? That's somebody who answers their emails, they do the things that you ask them to do. From a staff perspective, we're like, hey, could you help build this program, find a speaker or a subject matter expert, et cetera. You bring them in and they do those things and you're like, don't ever leave me. And you just like hold as tight as you can, right? You want to just hold on to them and never let them go. And then they start to wear down a little bit because they didn't realize when you said, hey, will you be on my conference committee, that what you really meant is, in perpetuity, right? And so they're just like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And depending on how long you're doing that, they're going to burn out and they're going to walk away and they're not going to have the same level of enthusiasm they had, and certainly not when recruiting other people. So one of the things we started doing is really putting an end time to our volunteers and cycling them off. And some of it's because I've been seeing burnout. This has been especially true for like our DEI committee, our diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. Those folks are some of the most passionate, giving, service-oriented folks I've ever seen. And they were there through the whole pandemic and they believe in what they're doing. And it's also very heart-heavy work. So it's a lot of emotional labor as well. and they've been there forever because they don't want to see it fail. And it's like, you gotta move on. I know you want to stay on. I know you don't want it to fail. We won't let it fail, but you got to move on, and you have to cycle people through, because we need fresh ideas, new ideas, but we also need people who have the energy. So we've been asking our volunteers to step off, but maybe not forever, just like take a break, right? So we've been putting applications in place for our committees where it's, you have 2 years, and then you don't just get to stay on automatically. You have to reapply, which means our volunteers have a moment where they can step back and be like, oh, I get to actually have space to decide, is this something I want to continue doing?
Yeah.
And maybe they do, or maybe I have volunteers who are coming to me and saying, hey, I'm cycling off this committee. What else do you have? And they want to see something new, so we can recruit them for a new position, which is fantastic. And it also brings other people in the wings space for them to come and participate.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've been kicking volunteers off, which is weird, but it's been working.
No, it's great. And I think part of the brilliance is one of the hardest parts about volunteer management is you don't know sort of the battery that person has for volunteering, right? It could be a year, it could be 5 years, it could be less depending on what seat on the bus that they're sitting in at their current moment. So setting the limit, giving them the opportunity or forcing the opportunity for them to sit back and really think about it. The person with the big battery will be like, all right, I'm off for 6 months. I'm ready to get back in. I loved that seat. Or the person with the smaller battery was like, oh, I really appreciated that. And let me think about where I want to go next. And they're infinitely more likely to come back and either go back into what they were doing before because they really felt fulfillment in that and all the things that they were looking for out of the role when they started. Or they'll say, I really enjoyed that, but now that I've gotten some exposure to other folks, I've heard that this other volunteer opportunity might be a better suit for me.
Mm-hmm. And have a positive experience that they can then recruit others for, right? They can say, oh, I did that for 2 years. It was amazing. I was really sad to cycle off, but you should definitely do that, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's important as well.
Right. Because when it comes from you or somebody on staff, hey, we need somebody to do that, it feels like delegation, right? Well, because it is, right? I mean, you're recruiting, but it's delegating a task that needs to be done to somebody else. When you're recruiting, the power of somebody that's been doing the role as a volunteer is they're not going to say anything bad because they're trying to get somebody to do it. Why else would I go to you, Amanda? Hey, would you really like this terrible volunteer position that I just did? Like, no, you're never going to say that. You're going to say, I cleared trails for 1.5 years on this mountain. It was wonderful. Like, you should do this too. Come on in. I'm getting kicked out. I need somebody. I'm still getting over that, but
Yeah, we do. I mean, there have been people that have been sad about it. I think in the conversation, we've really just started this process, so it hasn't rolled out to all of our committees yet. But for some, they're like, this is a hard transition period. But they like our DEI committee, for example, they did this intentionally. They know it's a hard transition period. They know they're kicking people out who are long-standing. They're like, you can come back in a year or so, but they know why they're doing it. And it's because they're trying to prevent continual burnout and be able to maintain functionality of the actual committee itself. So I think it's working. Ask me in a year how it's going or 2 years how it's going. But so far, I'm really impressed with my volunteers and their sort of self-evaluation.
So again, as you said, the answer may change in a year, but what is today? Give us sort of some of the tactical guidelines for this. Like, how long can somebody volunteer before you kick them out? Does it change per role? Does it change per the individual based on some demographical information that they provide to you? How do you determine their lifespan before they get their forced sabbatical?
Yeah, until about a year ago, it was me just watching and really just seeing the energy of and not even the productivity. There were folks that I remember about 2 years ago, I would come to on a committee and say, hey, have you thought about cycling off? And they're like, I'm still doing the thing. I still got you the email. I still did this. And I'm like, it's not performance based, right? This is not because you're not doing the job. Right. It's because you're tired and I can see it and everyone else can see it. And I don't want you to walk away from the association being exhausted. I don't want us to, chew you up and spit you out. That's not a good experience for you. And so for a while, it was just me doing an assessment. And then about a year ago, one of our committees actually developed an application process and a cycle process in a more formalized sense. And we've been using that application process across other committees. We've been using it as a template and testing it across other committees. Now, like any association, some of your committees are going to have different forms of culture, sort of these micro cultures within the group, depending what they do, right? Our legislative committee has a very different culture than our DEI committee.
Yeah.
Our DEI committee is a much more horizontal culture. It's consensus-based decision-making. Our legislative committee is like top brass, and we move through it quickly and we make decisions, and we'll vote if there's, contention, and it's highest vote, but then the chair gets to make the final decision, and that's it, right? It's just a very different culture. But having this template has allowed us to start slowly rolling it out amongst all the committees. And one of the things that the DEI committee specifically does is they actually do self-evaluations. So at the beginning, when you start your volunteer role, you do what do you want? What are you hoping to get out of it? You do that kind of evaluation to decide or determine what your goals are within your service for the next 2 years. And then after the first year of your 2-year service, you do a self-evaluation. How's it going? This is just for you. I don't see it. I don't read it. I don't score it. The rest of the committee doesn't see it.
Yeah.
But it's for the volunteer to decide, am I getting what I wanted out of this? And then after your 2 years, your final cycle, you do a final evaluation. You can say, yes, I did get out of this, or you could provide feedback to the committee about how that went. And it's really to check in and make sure that people are getting what they want out of their volunteer experience. Because I think largely people want community, and they want belonging, and they want to feel like they're contributing in some meaningful way. And even for them to do a self-evaluation can keep them in check, and then us in check, right? Then it's like, are we meeting the needs for that volunteer service? And so right now it's 2-year cycles for most positions in our committees. Because I think 1 year for many committees is just not enough time to really see everything.
Yeah.
Like our legislative committee, we have a biennium. So we have a short session and a long session every other year. So if you just 1 year, you're going to miss a lot. Our DEI committee does a lot of programming and outreach and coordinating with members. And so 1 year, again, not enough time. And so that's kind of the template that we're working on, and it gets adjusted depending on the committee. But we're really proud of the work that was set forth with it.
It's amazing. It's a lot of thought that goes into volunteer management. I think it's well worth the effort. Again, you just can't churn and burn those folks and expect that to be just this endless supply. And on the retention side, you also shared there's some other things you do to just sort of keep people enthused. Like, talk about some of those retention efforts. I think there's even a party in there somewhere.
Yeah, the party is the really fun one that we did last year. So when I started with the organization, and we're small staff, we're under 5 staff, right? We're like one of those little tiny businesses. Again, wear all the hats. And you have to make choices about things sometimes. In fact, it reminds me of, I met with somebody who also does associations, also works in the field. And I asked her at one point, I was feeling overwhelmed by my inbox. I hadn't seen the bottom of my inbox in like 3 months. And I asked her, I said, how can you help me here? Like, how do you do all the things? How do you accomplish all the things you're supposed to do? How do you get all the tasks done? I'm literally not getting all the emails answered. I'm literally not getting all the tasks done.
Yeah.
What do you do? And she just looked at me with so much sympathy. And like when you have to give someone bad news, but you feel really bad about it because they don't deserve it. But the truth is kinder.
Here it comes. Yeah.
And she goes, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't. You can't. You have to literally choose what it is that you accomplish, because every member that emails you and says, I have an idea, right? That's not going anywhere necessarily. You have to make decisions on how you're prioritizing. Hopefully you have a good board and governance that will help, guide what that decision-making process looks like. But you do have to make decisions. And one of the things that had been put on the back burner for years was volunteer appreciation. And it's because you have volunteers to do the work, and then you need them to do the work, and you're spending so much effort managing the volunteers. Because the truth is, it's not a set it and forget it situation. Volunteer management, it has the word management in there for a reason. Would it be faster if we just did it ourselves? Yes. Would it be as impactful or effective? Probably not, honestly. Appreciating volunteers has always been on the back burner, either for budget reasons or time reasons, or volunteers are moving in and out, and so you're trying to track them. And so for this last year, I said, you know what? That's it. Everybody's been burnt out. We're in person for our conference. We're doing something fun. And we hosted a party. And it was a volunteer exclusive event. We didn't have a bouncer at the door, but we did have like a badge check, and we got these little pins for the logo of our association. It was very simple. I literally brought a sponsor in for it, in the most tasteful way possible. And we had just like an open bar and food and just had a party. And that was it. It was, if you had volunteered, we sent out individual invitations for anybody who had volunteered for any of our committees or any of our component interest sections, and for our conference, and then hosted this thing. And at the party, somebody came up to me and said, I've never had a party for the work that I've done. This is amazing. I feel so seen. I feel like I want to do it again. Now I'm excited to sign up for this next year. It was fantastic. And we're going to do that again this next year, because I think it's so important to recognize the work that our volunteers are doing, that is above and beyond their own job, right? And it's a professional association. So not only is it above and beyond, but it's above and beyond your own job for your job, which is, it's not even your own interest or your hobby or your kids or whatever it is. It's like your job that you're adding more job to. So I think that's so, so important to have a party. Literally spend the money, do an open bar if you can afford it, honestly. Have food, make it fun, put in music. Again, we're Parks and Rec, so the fun part is kind of brought into the party itself. But just really have a moment to appreciate people. Enamel pens cost nothing, and people love them, and they wear them all the time to things. So just little things like that really make a difference.
Yeah. Drinks, food, people, that sounds like a great time. It sounds like a huge success. It sounds like there will be an option for that next year. Yes?
Yep, absolutely. We're doing it next year. And I think we're going to bring in some games or maybe a magician. I haven't decided yet.
Okay. Well, part of, the other part, I don't say it's other part because it's all inclusive under volunteer management, but there may be different strategies or different management style as it relates to the board. Talk to us a little bit about how that strategy may or may not change as it relates to the volunteer board members.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. It does change. And part of it is because the responsibility of the board is very different. They have literally legal responsibilities, and most people in the association know. You have D&O insurance for a reason. And those responsibilities include governance, and governance is something that is not if you get to it situation, right? It is you have to show up and you have to attend so many things. The board responsibilities are written into our bylaws in a very different way. And so underscoring that the importance of the board is really great, but it also means that who you recruit for the board, that process is a little different as well. You still want folks being able to say, hey, I was on the board, it was great, you should definitely do it, because their recommendations of people are going to be probably pretty solid if they've served on the board. But the vetting process is a little different. And we do hold elections, so there's that element of it. But you really want somebody who can show up to these meetings, who can show up and participate. And we used to have all in-person board meetings every other month for the whole year, and then pandemic, and we moved to virtual. And so for 3 years, we had entirely virtual board meetings. And let me tell you, there is a big difference in engagement from a board when they are reviewing financials on a camera versus in person. There's just a different level of engagement and this is just how we do Zoom. I'm guilty of it. I do it all the time where I'm like, an email pops up when I'm in the middle of a Zoom meeting and they're talking about something that's not related to me. And I go, okay, I'll just answer, what did they say? That is what that is. It's really hard to pull people together. And I don't want to be one of those managers that says, oh, we got to return to the office, because I actually think that remote provides a lot of flexibility for people. And it's a really great way to bring in, fresh staff, et cetera. But for our board, we were losing connections with people. And I think just like with the rest of volunteer recruitment, they are accountable to each other. They're not accountable to me, right? I'm staff, but that only goes so far. The board president emails you, though, that's a totally different thing. When you have the board president say, hey, did you send this thing? Or can we follow up on this? That person's going to email them way faster than they're going to email me. And so we had this conversation within my executive committee for the last 6 months of this last year with how can we fix this? How can we get people engaged? What are we missing here? We feel like we're not getting, people are like, yeah, I second, I vote. It felt very transactional, these meetings that we were having with the board. It felt like I was reporting a lot and not getting a lot back. And I really wanted to be able to step away, I think, from management level at the board so that they have more opportunity to talk about strategic planning and less about, nuances here, there, et cetera. And so we strategized last year and decided, you know what, we got to go back to in-person. We have to go to in-person. We have to do something interesting. We also changed our board retreat, which happens in December of every year. For the last few years, it's been me teaching, right? It's been, okay, you're on the board. Here are all the things you need to know, right? Like flip the whiteboard over and be like, step 1, this, and then this. Yeah, you have to do this, and you have to do this, and write this down because I'm going to need this by April, right? It's just a mess, and nobody cares, and you get glazed eyes, and it's whatever. And I'm like, I can record these, and you can go watch them, or like watch board leadership things. I don't need to do this in person for 3 days. So this year I brought in a facilitator. And I said, look, here's the challenge I've been having with my board. I'm not getting them engaged. They're going to be more engaged if they're talking about strategic planning and the vision of the organization and where we see ourselves. And like any association, we've changed, right? So we've moved from all in-person events to all virtual events to now a blend of both, but with the same number of staff somehow and the same budget. And so how are we getting creative with this? And I'm like, that's what I want my board working on. And so we brought in a facilitator who's amazing, who just gave that dialogue and did those like stand in a corner if you're this type of personality type of engagement, which again, Parks and Rec, they're here for it, right? They're like, let's get up, let's move, let's do that. They brought some fun and entertainment into this space. And it honestly, for me, it was great because I didn't have to talk at people for 3 days, but it allowed them to connect in a really meaningful way. And so by the end of the retreat, when my board president said, we're thinking about coming back in person, everyone was like, let's do it. We're here for it. We will travel around the state. Everybody's going to host a different month. We're here. We're going to do icebreakers at the beginning. It is a totally different board. And that engagement piece is so important. And we're again, knock on wood, ask me in a year how it's going. But we have a board that's like, this is what we want to do. And here's who we're connecting with. And they know each other better and they can start convening with each other and all their strategic planning initiatives and programming initiatives. And I'm really, really, really excited about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, there is something different about being in person. Absolutely. The facilitator, I think, is what really takes it to the next level, in my opinion. So not being the one up there. Again, I've been in this position. You're up there. You're just sort of talking and presenting. And you have to take pauses and say, what do people think? But it's different when you mix in sort of the get to know each other aspect, sort of the fun stuff, because that what really sort of shakes off the rust for some people to really start sharing. At some point, you have to do like around the room, everybody come up with an idea, and whether that can be during a game or that can be, literally sitting there at the table. I think that's what ultimately allows people to feel heard. And so in that strategic plan sense, in like board strategy sense, you get to feel more a part of something rather than I'm just being updated. Thanks. And if I have something really, if I feel so passionate, it bubbles up and I say something, then I'll do that. But it's a little bit more of a pull than it is a push.
Right, exactly. And I I absolutely agree with all of that. And I would even add for the board, I mean, it really is a different type of volunteer engagement too, because we're not asking for them to deliver products in the same way, right? Like our committees have certain emails that need to go out and certain administrative tasks or things they need to follow up on, right? They have tasks. The board doesn't really have tasks, right? Or I don't want them to have as many tasks. I really want them to be thinking high level, high picture. And they're not going to be able to do that if they're just listening and voting. or maybe talking about, like, they need to be engaged. They need to be actively and creatively coming up with ideas in conversation. So yeah, changing that perspective for sure.
Speaking of ideas and great conversations, I felt like this whole thing was great ideas and great conversations, Amanda. So thank you for that. I know you have more, and I could talk about, volunteer management for a whole nother episode, and maybe we should do that sometime. But I, as I do, tend to wrap us up here at the end by asking you, Amanda, is there somebody within your network you think our audience would benefit from hearing from?
Yeah, I think you should reach out to Kristen Paul with the Association of Oregon Counties. She's been doing some really great work over there. We have some overlap in our membership. We both have government staff as our members. And so it's been really fun to watch her in her career.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again, Amanda, for the time and sharing all your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.